Sometimes it can be really hard to know what in the world this man is talking about. The son of a poet and a UCLA law professor, this dude will be using words like cantankerous and then start talking about lemon meringue and then say some shit like this. So to decode this Earl album, I really had to get in the right headspace and get myself some of that good, that dank. I got me that SARS COVID-19 Omicron strain for my first listen of Sick, and let me tell you, that shit was hitting. Bussin' even. What can I say? I'm a dedicated fan and I really wanted to absorb what our Lord and Savior was telling us. I mean, I would probably go to church if SRS was the Bible, Death World was the uniform, and this was the teacher. So what is Tebe the Wise trying to get across on this album? He describes Sick as his humble offering of 10 songs recorded in the wake of the worldwide coronavirus pandemic and subsequent lockdowns. And I think for me and a lot of Earl fans, especially on Reddit, the first thing we noticed was these lyrics that seemed like they were anti-vax. And this isn't even that much of a stretch because some of the album's promo had pictures of syringes wrapped in snakes. And if you know anything about snakes, they're usually a symbol of some sketchy shit happening. They're usually not the most positive and trustworthy sign. But through listening to this album, whether Earl is personally anti-vax or not is really irrelevant. And if that's your only takeaway, I'd say you're really missing the point. Because while this album has some lines that might seem like this rallying cry against vaccines and lockdowns, Earl leaves it subtle enough to where he's talking about several issues at once. And the beautiful thing is you can view it however you want and it still makes sense. For example, everything Earl says on the album about needles and sickness and control could just as easily be applied to his personal struggles with addiction. If you want to listen to this album and hear an anti-vax message, it's there for you. If you want to listen to Sick and hear about Earl's battle with drug use, you have that too. And if you want to hear about government and media control and misinformation, you can find that on Sick also. On the last song, he even says, "Life could change in the blink of an eye. I'm wrinkling time. I'ma leave it to y'all to get hoodwinked and surprised." So he's really leaving it up to us to find our own meaning in the album. And we can see this on the very first lines when he says, "The cost of living high, don't cross the picket line and get the virus. Wildcat has got him in a bind, stay inside." So at first glance, he's commenting on how the pandemic has workers in a bind. You can either stay home and starve with no money to pay your bills, or you could cross the picket line, go to work, and also risk dying by getting the virus. So people are in a bind. It's a lose-lose situation. But it could also be interpreted as the cost of living high. Earl's being forced to stay inside due to COVID, which is just not a healthy place for him, as we know from his album called I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside, which is all about how his battle with addiction and depression led him to isolate himself and stay home all day. He knew exactly where being stuck at home all day or having cabin fever would lead him, so he started writing about what was going on around him in order to fill that void. Then he says, "Mad Hatters cap in every line." So here's a perfect example of Earl observing both sides of the political conversation in America. He's cleverly saying Mad Hatters, like MAGA hat wearing Trump supporters, lie with everything they say, but it'll get exposed as time goes on. Then in the very next line, he goes right into a right-wing conspiracy theory. He says they start hacking when they can't shrink us. And here he's referencing this idea that the elite have an agenda to shrink the world population. And they're doing it through the vaccine, which according to boomer Facebook memes, hack into our DNA because they use mRNA technology. So after dunking on these Mad Hatters and then immediately presenting one of their main arguments, Earl says, "I found the middle in a bit of balance." So he's taking this free independent thinker approach where he's going to observe the state of the world and share his insights with us. But doing this is also an outlet for him to express his emotions and protect his own mental health. But then on the song Sick, Earl falls right back into his addiction, talking about slipping and falling into getting pleasure by the gram. And then he says, "Can't go outside anymore because people are sick. Fuck a second chance, I won't let the devil in." So he's really determined not to allow the pandemic and isolation ruin his mental health, but like pretty much everyone for the past 2 years, he's struggling with that. Then on Visions, Earl keeps reflecting on the pandemic and he touches on the rent moratorium and how people have become homeless because of the pandemic and they have to live in tents. And this is where he drops his most anti-vax line, saying, "Fuck out my face with syringe." But in the context of homeless people in tents, he's talking about descending to the lowest levels of his drug addiction and not about vaccine. And he's criticizing people for thinking that the vaccine is going to solve all their problems and fix these bigger social issues like homelessness that COVID has highlighted. And then he says, "I know the toll never tells," meaning that the death toll of COVID isn't the true cost. From homelessness to mental health issues to people having to stay home for years, Earl is saying that vaccine is not going to help address these issues that have developed. Now let's talk about Tabula Rasa. Probably one of the best just pure lyrical rap songs I've heard in a really long time. It's a work of art, and Earl drops my favorite line on the album. He says, "I have to write to find balance. This game of telephone massive. I do what I have to with the fragments." And this is really the centerpiece of the whole album. He's making sense of the world around him through rap. He also talks about how complacency and deceit are the root causes of the protests we saw in 2020. Again, this could apply to both sides of our political spectrum, with the left being fed up with complacency and deceit in our criminal justice system, while people on the right are tired of complying with masks and vaccines and also feel like they're being deceived by the authorities. And just the name of the song, Tabula Rasa, means clean slate. And this is essentially a theory that says people are born completely blank and everything we are is just a direct result of the life experiences that we have. This isn't always a good thing because as we get older, we get less open-minded and more stuck in our ways. And the reason this can be a problem is because the current time we're living in is completely unprecedented. Our lives have changed so much, so a lot of the things that we thought we knew about life may not even apply anymore or in the future. And I think Earl's trying to say that we should approach these issues with a blank slate or an open mind. And he basically spells this out on the next song, Lie, where he says that with every trip around the sun, the sludge gets thicker, and he's just trying to chip away at it. So this sludge that he's talking about is the opposite of tabula rasa. This is the information that we accumulate every time we go around the sun. Every year that we get older, we get more stuck in our ways. And then on Lobby, which has one of the hardest beats Earl's ever rapped on, he drops another bar that could be interpreted a few different ways, saying, "Cover your nose, it's surveillance. I know it's a quota to fill. Where are you going and what's your intent?" And so this line does seem like it's about COVID, but I think Earl's talking about how police stop and frisk people in order to reach their arrest quotas, specifically for drugs, as Earl talks about inhaling weed a few lines before. And he even says, "I happen to know the assailant," with the assailant in this case being his drug dealer. So Earl's basically making fun of cops for working so hard to catch people smoking weed instead of stopping actual crime. But at the same time, he's pointing out a truth that much of America ignores, or they cover their nose to avoid facing, which is that as part of the war on drugs, police departments are financially incentivized to make drug arrests because they get more funding, and police departments get to actually keep the money and the assets they seize during drug raids. So if you're a cop, you get rewarded for going after drug crimes over violent crimes. So much that police arrested more people for weed possession than all violent crimes combined. And even though all races use drugs about the same amount, black people are 4 times more likely to be arrested for weed. So real quick, let's talk about why that might be. Well, if you're a cop, where would you go to fill your quota? Are you going to go to rich white areas to harass people who might be politically powerful, who have the means to fight back in court? Or will you go to poor neighborhoods where you can easily intimidate people who don't have resources to fight back and will sometimes take a guilty plea even when they're innocent, making it that much easier for you to fill your quota? Just think about it like this. If SWAT teams started raiding homes in Beverly Hills or frat houses on college campuses looking for drugs and seizing people's cars and cash, there would be a massive social and political backlash. But because these raids are common practice in minority communities, it just slips right under the radar. And then the song ends with this audio clip of Mike Trout stealing third base, which could be a reference to Earl's ability to avoid the cops even with the odds against him. But then again, these lines could all be talking about COVID. Surveillance due to COVID, the government controlling where people can and can't go, doctors inflating the number of people who have COVID to fill a quota, and Earl avoiding getting the virus itself. So then the last song, Fire in the Hole, is about Earl writing as he watches the chaos and confusion around him. The fire leaping out the hole is his lyrics, and deep breathing or rapping the words adds oxygen to the flames and makes what he says more powerful by sharing it with the world. And I'm gonna go back to this line again because it just goes right back to this central idea of Earl as an observer, giving us his interpretation of what's going on with our world. He says, "Life could change in the blink of an eye. I'm wrinkling time. I'ma leave it to y'all to get hoodwinked and surprised." And the reason I love this line so much is because this is the whole point of the album. Earl's gonna live his truth and he's gonna leave it up to us to find ours. So I wanna hear your thoughts. Do you think that Earl is sending an anti-vax message here, or is he talking about mental illness and addiction, or is he talking about all of the above and just letting people take their own interpretation? Let me know in the comments. And if you wanna see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and check out some more of my videos on Earl right here. And if you've been eyeing this beautiful artwork of Frank Ocean behind me, I've actually partnered with the artist to get you 10% off all of his hip hop inspired art. So check that out at the link in the description.